How's it going, everybody? This is the 2 Minute Drill. I'm Michael Rockman. That's Bailey Kumar. And today we are talking about the AFC West. We're doing NFL draft recaps. We're talking about every single draft class for every single team, the reigning Super Bowl champion, Sean Payton's squad. We got a couple of squads that are definitely very interesting to talk about that had some big drafts. First one we're going to be talking about is the Los Angeles Chargers, as they were first on the board. And they started things off with Joe Alt, a pick that a lot of people were speculating on at number 5 because of the just varying options that were on the board, whether it was Malik Neighbors or it was, JC Latham was a guy that was highly rumored at one point. Eventually, they settled on Joe Alt, offensive tackle out of Notre Dame, a generational prospect, a guy that a lot of people viewed as the consensus offensive tackle number one. What are your thoughts on this selection? Especially when they have Rashawn Slater and Trey Pipkins already occupying both tackle spots.
Yeah, this is a kind of an interesting pick to me. I did not see Alt as generational, by the way. I know you just kind of said that, but I didn't really view him as generational, but I did view him as the best tackle in this class. And we have seen players, probably most notably Evan Neal, kind of struggle with that transition from left tackle to right tackle. So it's kind of an open question. Are they going to move Alt to right tackle, or are they maybe going to move Slater to right tackle? So yeah, it'll be an interesting decision there. But yeah, I think Alt. I'm not sure about this pick, honestly. If I'm the Chargers, I know that Harbaugh wants to establish that run game with Ramon, and Alt is the best pick if that's what they want to do. But I'm not sure that's the best approach with Justin Herbert as your quarterback. You kind of lost your two best receivers last year. Quentin Johnson didn't look the best his rookie year, but he still does have time to recover. So maybe I would have gone Neighbors if I were them. But I think Alt is an okay pick. It's good for what the vision of their team is.
Yeah, personally, I didn't have him as offensive tackle one, so I don't view him as generational per se either. But I feel like the consensus view on him was that he was this, kind of generational prospect atop a highly decorated offensive tackle class. I like the pick. I do think he's going to stick in at left tackle, whether that means Slater goes into left guard or moves over to right tackle. I'm not sure yet. I know Harbaugh in the presser after said that he believes Pipkins is part of the best 5 on his offensive line, and he thinks that the best 5 will play. So it'll be interesting to track, see what happens with that final formation for the offensive line. But this is an interesting selection, and they were a team that kind of they aren't necessarily rebuilding, but they had to retool their roster, and they knew that they had to kind of reestablish what the identity of the Los Angeles Chargers were going to be. And they felt like Joe Alt was the one that best did that. So I don't hate the pick at all. Especially what made it interesting was they eventually got their receiver. On day 2, they went and got Ladd McConkey with the 34th pick. They got Junior Colson in the third round with a 69th overall pick. Both guys I think are going to step in and be starters right away for this team. When you're getting 3 day one starters, I think that's very promising, maybe a little concerning for the overall roster. But, I think both picks are talented players to where I don't hate the selections at all. They address big needs. They could be argued as most talented players on the board at the time they were selected. I like the pick, and I think that overall it was a well done draft for the Chargers through day 2.
Yeah, the day 2 is, kind of continued the kind of their idea of day 1, where it's very clearly like a roster retool. You're trying to just get the best players and fit them into your system. Ladd McConkey is a great fit for them. That slot position should be a pretty reliable target for Herbert underneath. Something they kind of struggled for a while is giving Herbert that nice, good underneath option. You have Junior Colson, who, obviously Michigan pick under Harbaugh. He's a guy who can lead that defense. He's going to do what they want to do there. He can lead by example. So yeah, I think these are 2 really, really strong picks from them. Should be instant contributors to rookie year, play a lot of snaps, and yeah, they're kind of knocking it out of the park with their first 3 picks.
Yeah, and as day 3 happened, they went and got Justin Boyd B. Tarheeb still in the 5th round, Cam Hart in the 5th round, Kamani Vidal, Brendan Rice, and Cornelius Johnson. I think the most interesting of that batch is Brendan Rice because he's a guy that I was definitely lower on compared to consensus, but there is always like that line where it's like, okay, right now I don't value him as highly as everyone, but once he starts getting further back in the draft, it's like, okay, this guy would be a good value grab. I think I can understand why he'd be selected in this range, and I think he'd be a good pick. And then he gets to the 7th round, and the Chargers still have him on the board, and they're able to pick him up. And especially in an offense where maybe you aren't necessarily like desperate to replace Mike Williams, but you need that jump ball, big body guy. And Brendan Rice is very good at playing the ball in the air, high pointing the football, and he did a big part of that at USC. And maybe he's not going to be a day 1 starter as a 7th round pick for the Chargers, but there is potential there for them to have potentially, there's potential there for them to have landed two very solid wide receivers. There's Cornelius Johnson, who has experience in that Michigan offense, and then Brendan Rice, who has that big body and that experience in terms of just playing the ball in the air and showcasing that talent already with McConkey, who you got in the second round. So I thought it was a nice haul in that regard. And I like the cornerback picks of Still and Cam Hart. I think both guys have massive potential, have shown some great flashes. Tariq Still is a guy that I've been tracking since his freshman year after he matched up extremely well against Rashad Bateman when he was Maryland versus Minnesota in a nice game where he really stood out. And since then, he's fallen out of favor a little bit in terms of how he's graded and performed, but he played the slot for Maryland this last year, and I think he looked excellent while doing it. So I'm very intrigued to see how he does with the Chargers.
Yeah, I agree with you that Rice is kind of the most interesting pick here. That Chargers wide receiver room is kind of wide open after Johnson and Palmer. They brought in a lot of rookies. There's not a lot of kind of established vets there, so there's definitely playing time for him. He could definitely make the roster out of camp if he has a strong performance there. And I mean, I really like Brandon Rice. In the 2-minute drill I did on him, I gave him a second round grade, but that was kind of me. I don't know, maybe a bit too much wishful thinking on my end. I kind of said in the video that I knew he would fall to day 3 just because guys who like that, who have trouble separating, usually bust in the league. So I was not really surprised to see him kind of slide there. All the way around 7 is a bit too much of a slide in my opinion. But yeah, they got a great pick there. Cam Hart, another great pick there, competitive player, a lot of experience, and they're rebuilding the rooms and the positions that they need to rebuild.
Yeah, I think it's a nice step in the right direction. You're looking at Jim Harbaugh trying to kind of rebuild, retool this roster, trying to get it to where it needs to be. I think those first 3 guys are all going to be starters for this team, and I assume that they're going to be pretty solid starters so they can stick around on this roster. If you get 1, 2 more contributors out of that back half, I think this is an excellent draft, and it's one that the Chargers will feel very grateful for when you kind of look at when the Harbaugh era started in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
So for an overall grade, what are you thinking for it?
This is kind of a solid B to B plus. Let me be generous. Let me say B plus. I think this is a great first draft. Whenever you have a new regime, it's pretty important that you hit your picks early because they're kind of going to be the defining players for you. When you get to that year 3, which is a lot of like the decision year for a lot of these coaches, you want these guys who have developed a little bit, and you can show is like, look, we're developing solid players. We're winning games now, and that first draft is so crucial in doing that. So yeah, I think this is a really strong start for this new Chargers era. So yeah, B plus.
I'm going to give it an A minus. You address your big needs, you add some high end players, and I think you're going to add some starters that are going to stick around and contribute for this team. Doing that, you can't really ask for much more out of a draft. There is going to be question of how much value they get out of that day 3 haul, but I like the value that they got for where they were picked in terms of just consensus opinion. So I'm intrigued. I think they really kind of knocked it out of the park. I think you can't really ask too much more out of this Chargers draft. If I showed it off to people and said, hey, I'm from the future. This is what they do. I think a lot of Chargers fans would sign off. Obviously, they'd probably want the trade back with Minnesota so that they have a few more first round picks in their pockets. But other than that, I think they're pretty happy. So the fact that no trade up really happened for McCarthy kind of proved, well, the 1 pick swap, but the fact that there wasn't a major trade up for McCarthy kind of proves that maybe the offers that people knew about weren't as truthful in the real front offices that happened. So overall, A minus for the Chargers, and I think they did a great job. Another team that is kind of starting their rebuild and maybe rebuilding over again is the Denver Broncos. They start off with the 12th pick and they get Bo Nix, quarterback out of Oregon. This was what, the 5th quarterback off the board by this point, and no, 6th quarterback off the board.
Yeah.
That's crazy. 6 in 12 picks. So just someone that it's risky to go QB6 with the number 12 overall pick, no matter how you slice it. But, there are a lot of fans out there on Bo Nix. They think that he has pro-ready ability. They think he can step into a system and manufacture success pretty easily. What are your thoughts on this pick, and do you think Nix fits into that Peyton offense well?
I'm honestly unsure about this pick. I do think Nix is a huge reach here at 12. I don't think he was a first round quarterback at all. I wasn't very impressed with what I saw him in college. Kind of, I don't know. But at the end of the day, Peyton wants this guy, and I don't think he would rush the selection. if he didn't think that Bo Nix could execute his offense at a high level. So I'm pretty certain that Payton got the guy you want. I think the Broncos might have been content to kind of just wait a year, maybe next year get their QB if Nix didn't follow them or if a quarterback didn't follow them. So yeah, I mean, I'm not personally a fan of the pick, but we got to see how he fits in that Payton offense. And I do think he kind of fits well into that, kind of on rails offense where you execute what's given on you. You kind of see him played in multiple different schemes in college, and he was able to execute them all well. So, you know, he's a quick learner in that regard. So, yeah, we'll see how much this it works for them. My issues with Knicks are a bit more physical and kind of mental than how much he fits the scheme. So, yeah, we'll see. I guess is my final word on it.
Yeah, I mean, I was way off on where I expected Knicks to go. I thought, especially with like guys like Hooker last year, where we were hearing first round hype and then they fell to the third round. I thought same was going to happen for Knicks and potentially Penix as well. Which I mean, we'll talk about that later. But you know, for me, I don't love the pick, but I do think that Knicks can be a good quarterback in the NFL. So I get where it comes from. The big thing I think for Denver fans and Broncos overall, just they have to be patient with the guy. And I know for an older quarterback prospect, maybe that's not the most optimistic thing to hear, but I think it's something that he has to grow into. You know, we saw it at Auburn where he was kind of struggling out of the gates. He was a headache and a half at quarterback whenever he was throwing the ball downfield. He was misfiring on passes, forcing throws and creating turnovers, and just overall inconsistent play that plagued his, overall reputation around the SEC. He transferred to Oregon. He kind of found his footing. He found his groove. He found his confidence, and he became one of the best quarterbacks in college football. I don't think he's going to necessarily become one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, but I do think that, if you give him time to kind of shake out the kinks, kind of work on some of his wrinkles in his game and get them ironed out, I do think there's going to be a solid, trustable quarterback. But I think the timeline is going to kind of look similar to the Baker Mayfields and the Jared Goffs, where you have to kind of get through that rough patch of early play before you start to see it kind of elevate and become the trusty starter that you're kind of looking for. And, for some teams, they aren't going to be able to kind of hold on that long and kind of buy in for that long. And I think that's just the monster of the NFL. But, if you told me that by his second contract, Nix kind of goes and is starting for another team, but he kind of revives his career, that sounds like the type of quarterback that he is. So for Denver, if you're willing to kind of hold on and be patient with them, I think it can work out. But that is a very important part, in my opinion. Maybe he just lights it up right out the gates as a rookie.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that the Broncos are kind of all in on Sean Payton as their head coach. If you look at their draft, there's no second round pick compensation for that Sean Payton trade. So I think they're going to give Knicks time. They'll give Payton time, and that's really all you can really ask for first young QB is kind of that that solid foundation that year to year is going to be the same offense, the same people in your ear telling you what to do. We've seen so many quarterbacks fail when they bring in new offensive play callers. They bring in new guys. They're telling them all to do different things. So that kind of consistency, I think, is going to be huge for Knicks' development.
Absolutely. And then moving on to their next batch of picks, we're going to split up this day 3 just because they don't have that second day 2 pick. So we're going to talk about their first 3 selections on day 3. Round 3, the only day 2 pick they made, they get Jonah Ellis, edge rusher out of Utah. 4th round, they trade up and they get Troy Franklin to pair up with his old college quarterback, Bo Nix, and, a guy that some people talked about as a potential first rounder. And then with their first 5th round pick, they get Chris Abrams-Draine, a cornerback out of Missouri that is tried and tested in the SEC and has shown a lot of promise and ability in that regard in that conference. And just, this is a great haul in terms of what the Denver Broncos had as far as flexibility to draft these guys. Franklin falling down the board and making the aggressive move to move up, I think absolutely makes sense. You trade off Jerry Jeudy, and while maybe you already have Marvin Mims and Cortland Sutton, you could kind of use that speed threat on the outside that can have the size and maybe let Mims work a little bit more short to intermediate. Even though he is a deep threat, kind of big splash play guy, I think you can kind of keep them both working in different areas of the field. Jonah Ellis is a guy that in that 3-4 defense, I think works very well. He's a nice speed rusher, shows some nice lower body strength for a guy that is as small and kind of twitchy as he is. And then there's Chris Abrams-Draine, who maybe has to kick inside the slot, but overall he has shown the ability to kind of hold up against SEC competition, which is probably the easiest to translate to NFL success. He was the top cornerback for the Missouri Tigers, even though Ennis Rakestraw was the higher valued prospect. Abrams Drain was the guy that's been there week in, week out, kind of showcasing his ability as the top corner. He's physical to the ball, and I really like his game. These first three picks, first four overall, I mean, I think it's a pretty good draft for the Broncos as long as Bo Nix works out. But especially with these day two, kind of day three, early part of day three picks, they did a phenomenal job.
Yeah, I agree with that. Their next three picks after Knicks were very, very good. Jonah Ellis is the guy that I was pretty high on. I think he's going to be their third edge rusher, I assume right now. But somebody who can kind of develop. He's pretty young. I believe he's only 20, so he has time to kind of grow into that role a little bit. Gives him some options there as a rotational player. Troy Franklin, yeah, a guy a lot of people are high on. I less so. I probably would take him in the third, but yeah, in the fourth. That kind of having that familiarity with the QB when you enter the NFL, having that guy that you've been with for a couple of years, and then you can come to the NFL together. That mini camp, you already have that connection. You know how you play together. So yeah, I think that's pretty big for a young QB. So that was a great pick. And like you said, Chris Abrams Drain, probably a nickel guy for them, but yeah, he should contribute his rookie season, which is a great value in the fifth round to get guys who can contribute their rookie year. So yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you. They kind of knocked it out of the park with their kind of second, third, and fourth pick.
Yeah, I thought it was an excellent job of using the resources, especially when you didn't have a second round pick, to be able to go and get guys like Ellis and Franklin, who you could very easily argue would have been second round, or if they were second round picks, like people wouldn't have been shocked by. So I think they did a nice job with these early picks. And then the back half of that day three, they got Audric Estime, the running back out of Notre Dame, Devon Vele, wide receiver out of Utah, and then Nick Gargiulo, the center out of South Carolina. Losing Lloyd Cushenberry, I'm not sure Gargiulo is going to come in and start at center, but I do think that adding some depth is nice for that regard. And then guys like Vele and Estime, I think, are going to be a little bit sneaky for potential competitors for playtime. Vele had splash ability in that Utah offense, and I think with a healthy Cam Rising, there would have been a lot more potential for him to kind of showcase what he was able to do. I liked his size. He lit up the combine. So having that combination of size and athleticism, I think really kind of makes a case for him to be such a value pick here in the seventh round. And then Audric Estime, we've seen what he can do at Notre Dame. Obviously, the power is there and very capable. They probably are going to rely on Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin. But, if Estime can work his way into that backfield as like a goal line back, short yardage type situation type dude, I do think that there's an opportunity for him to kind of establish that and then potentially expand on his role in that offense.
Yeah, Estime is kind of an interesting pick because they kind of already have a crowded backfield in terms of running back committee. I'm not sure how much kind of difference he adds with Samaje Perine there. They're kind of playing a similar role, so that might be a sign that they're looking to move on next year or just giving him a reduced role. So I'm not sure how crazy I am about that pick. But yeah, the rest of these picks are in. I mean, they have a fifth and 2 7s. We'll see how much contribution they made. But I think if you had this Broncos draft, like if I just gave this to you and tell you what rounds they were in, I said this is their first round pick Knicks, second Ellis, third round Troy Franklin, fourth round Chris Abrams Drain, and then like fifth Audric Estime, you'd believe me. That's kind of a believable run out. So I think the best thing the Broncos did this draft is kind of work around that lack of a second round pick and kind of pick up contributors all throughout the draft.
Yeah, so maybe a little bit of a reach in round one, but if they do like Nix as a quarterback, then it makes total sense. What's your overall grade for the Broncos here?
I'm gonna have to give the Broncos a C plus here, a C for the Knicks pick, and that's kind of when you make a pick like that, like the entire draft is just based on that. How much are you going to hit on the QB? They didn't give up any additional compensation to get Knicks. He was kind of just there at 12, so that's a good thing. But I think the entire class is relying on Knicks. I do like Ellis, Franklin, and Drain to contribute year one, but I had to give them a C plus. I didn't think they did an outstanding job just because of how risky kind of that Knicks pick is.
Yeah, I 100% get that. And I think, for me, I would probably give it a C plus as well. I think when you look at the pick of Knicks, it's really going to come down to whether he succeeds or not, if the team is going to become good. So there's questions, and that's what kind of docks this for me, because personally, I don't think Knicks is going to work out. But, I do trust Sean Payton to select the right quarterback. And if he thinks it's Knicks, then it makes total sense. And for the next team, probably one of the more shocking selections, even though it made sense from a talent standpoint, the Las Vegas Raiders kicked things off by selecting Brock Bowers with the 13th overall pick. I think what was most shocking about this isn't the fact that Brock Bowers came off the board, because talent wise, this is about the range we expected for him. But the fact that they had Michael Mayer on roster already, obviously both guys can play at the same time, but this is a little bit surprising compared to the other needs that they had on the roster. Bailey, what do you make of this pick?
Yeah, this is definitely a pick I was not expecting. I think a lot of people were assuming the Raiders would maybe trade up for a QB, maybe get one in the back half of the first, trade up and take Penix. So when you kind of get to the pick and the six QBs already off the board, they can really go in any direction. Maybe some people were assuming they would take like a tackle or maybe someone on the defense, but they take Brock Bowers when they already have a tight end they took in the first round last year and Michael Mayer. So I mean, the talent, like as you said, is undeniable. Bowers, generational tight end prospect, coming out of Georgia, and I think he's actually going to add a lot to this offense. And I'm excited to see how him and Mayer coexist in this offense. I assume both of them will be on the field a lot, so we might see some different alignments. Bowers out of the backfield, Bowers in the slot, stuff like that. So yeah, this is a very exciting pick in my opinion.
I am excited to see what happens with this offense. This is going to be one of the better short passing attacks in the NFL, especially with Gardner Minshew, who I think is very efficient in that regard. I think they wanted a quarterback. I think they were hoping that Penix was going to get to them. Probably didn't think Atlanta would be taking a guy. Maybe they would have been willing to take Knicks if he got to them as well. It's hard to kind of fathom where these other QBs would have landed if per se, the Broncos passed on Bo Nix, or the Vikings didn't take McCarthy, or if the Falcons pass on Penix. Where's that next landing spot for them? Would Penix be going to the Vikings right now? Would Nix be a Raider? Who knows? But I think they definitely wanted a quarterback, and they had their eyes on a few guys, and the board just did not play out to their favor. But they said, hey, we got to adapt. And right now we see a guy like Brock Bowers, who we think is extremely talented, and let's go ahead and select him. I thought they were going to go right tackle, whether that was Fuaga or, maybe Flatham slipped. But ultimately, it seems like they were willing to kind of wait on tackle and instead try to get some additional weapons in this offense. I do think it's exciting. I think this is going to be a team that's going to be very intriguing for any quarterback that potentially is a rookie in the future or maybe hits the open market. Dak Prescott, who knows? But this is going to be a very fun offense. I'm excited to see what happens with this running back situation. Zamir White is a guy that I think a lot of people kind of expected the Raiders to add some competition for him, but now he fully gets this backfield job. So it's an interesting offense, but I'm excited for it, and I think Brock Bowers has the potential to potentially be. I don't know why I keep doubling up on saying potential, but he has the potential to possibly be like the number one weapon after Adams kind of, maybe retires or gets older and has his game inevitably regress a little bit, even though may not come for a little bit. But I think this is an offense that is very exciting, and I like the pick for Bowers.
Yeah, it kind of seems like the focus of the Raiders' draft was, hey, if we don't get our quarterback now, let's make sure the quarterback we get next year or whenever we get it is in the best possible situation to succeed. So I kind of like this how they switched gears here, and that takes us to their day two picks. Michael, what do you think about them?
Yeah, so for Jackson Powers Johnson, I think he slots in immediately as a starting center for this team. You look around at the roster. I think Andre James was their last season starter, and James had his moments, but ultimately, definitely someone that they probably wanted to move on from, or at least replace or bring in competition for. So I do like Jackson Powers Johnson. I think next to Parham, you're kind of beefing up this offensive line, and you have a really nice, just kind of roster going on. I'm not sure who's going to start on the right side. Offensive line is still a big need for them, so I think it's something that they're going to have to eventually address. But they got Delmar Glaze with that third round pick, who maybe they view him as someone that can either play that right tackle spot or kick into guard. I'm not sure what the plan is. I haven't watched many of the pressers or talks about Delmar Glaze from maybe some of the beat writers of the Raiders organization, but getting offensive line was huge. And I think this is a draft where they said, okay, we missed out on the guys we wanted. Instead of trying to force it by maybe picking a rattler or something like that, we should instead just continue to bolster the surrounding system and hope that we eventually fall into a place where we can either trade up for a quarterback, or we're at least surrounding someone with a great opportunity to where, maybe we can sign someone off of the open market if a big name were to hit it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with this Jackson Powers Johnson pick, who I had him as a top 20 player, so a great value there at the in the middle of the second round. I think he might see some play at guard, honestly. I think Andre James is good enough to kind of hold down that center position. They might try Jackson Powers Johnson at right guard just because I don't know who their starting right guard is right now, but I think that he will kind of see at least a look there in the training camp, see if he can kind of play that spot. And yeah, Jamal Glaze, maybe more of a developmental guy, not a guy you really want starting your rookie season, but if you can get him in your system, get him, coached up correctly, he could be a long-term starter at the right tackle position. And if JPJ does play that right guard spot, you got the right side of your line locked down for a while, which is, I think all you can really ask for out of this kind of day two selections.
Yeah, and I do think that there's that versatility to get some opportunity for JPJ, whether it's at center or guard. I think he has the versatility to plug in either spot, and I think that gives them more flexibility when it comes to having these guys compete for jobs. I think last year, if I'm not mistaken, I have the snap counts right here. Actually, let me pull it up. It was Van Rotten who was playing the right guard spot, so makes sense for if they're looking for Powers Johnson to step in instead, it would make sense for that type of improvement as well. I'm interested to see what happens at right tackle because Munford wasn't necessarily a dependable piece on that offensive line. He was young though, so it's part of the development. But maybe they bring in Glaze and he is the starter. But third round rookies, as much as we'd love to just have like first round starter, second round starter, third round starter, fourth round project that's eventually going to start, it doesn't always work out that way to where these third round guys are more developmental and they maybe can be depth, but they aren't ready to start right away. Or sometimes it even happens for the second round, or sometimes these fourth rounders just never even see the light of day on the field. So we gotta temper our expectations a little bit. He's probably going to be competing with Munford for that right tackle job, but there's a reasonable like expectation to where it's like, okay, he just doesn't win it. And then the Raiders are still stuck with an issue at right tackle. So there is going to be this question mark of what's going to happen for the offensive line. But I do like the addressing of the needs, even if I wasn't necessarily as high on Glaze as others.
Yeah, and they can even bring in a vet right tackle to compete for that spot. I know a lot of teams get annoyed, like, oh, we have these needs and we need to address them in the draft, but there's still some pretty talented free agents out there. I'm sure they can find somebody who's like a serviceable right tackle in the free agency right now.
Yeah, so day three was interesting for the Raiders because they got some notable names. Maybe not necessarily the highest on the board or anything, but guys that I think all had some pretty intriguing storylines going on during the draft. They started out with the Camryon Richardson, the big outside cornerback that lit it up during the combine with some great 40-yard dash speed. And then Tommy Eichenberg, the Ohio State run stuffer. Dylan Laub, the kind of heartwarming story of the Senior Bowl. And then Trey Taylor, the Air Force safety. This was a guy that, there was kind of questions about if he was going to like get into the NFL right away. I'm pretty sure he had like the issue of trying to apply for the waiver of trying to do a service. And then MJ Devonshire, who is a guy that I think a lot of people are excited about because of the new return rules. They think this is a guy that can kind of plug in and be able to contribute in the kick return game. And a lot of teams, I think, are now trying to again like prioritize return men because of the new rules. They think there's going to be more production with special teams that guys like Devonshire have more value to front offices.
Yeah, just looking at the names here, this is a pretty elite special teams group they got here. All these guys can kind of, contribute on that, phase right away. So, maybe something they're prioritizing there. But yeah, I always love it when teams take guys who can contribute on special teams right away and then back up and maybe eventually develop into a starter. Tommy Eichenberg, I think, is kind of the biggest name here in terms of what I predict them, who I predict is going to make a contribution down the line. Kind of a limited player, but you put him in roles where he can kind of stay in between the tackles as a downfield guy, linebacker. He's a decent run stuffer in that regard, so he could see some play. MJ Devonshire was another guy I was a bit higher on. I thought he would go much higher in the draft just due to the athleticism and experience there at the cornerback spot. But the Raiders bring in somebody like him, draft someone like him to bring in some youth to that cornerback room, which has been surprisingly solid for them. So yeah, I think they did a pretty solid job on this day three.
Yeah, I think it was a nice job. You look at just what they were able to do for impact. And I think there is enough guys that there's potential there. DeCamerion Richardson is someone that I think has the athletic traits that you're looking for as a cornerback. I think the ball production was kind of the big question mark for him in terms of can he kind of produce more in terms of batting the ball away and kind of making plays with the ball in the air. But overall, I think what they were able to accomplish with this day three, there's intrigue. And I think that's kind of all you can ask for some of these day three hauls. There's guys that can work their way onto the field, and there's guys that are going to contribute in the special teams department to where I'm a fan of it. So overall grade, I think I'm giving it a B. I didn't love going with Brock Bowers just in terms of need, but even in spite of that, I think the talent is there to where the pick is still a very good one. I like Powers Johnson, but after that, there are question marks for me to where I didn't love this draft and think it was just like a great way to kind of transform the Raiders. I think a lot of the issues that existed before the draft still kind of exist with this team after it, and I think that's where my holdup is from keeping them to breaking into that next tier and getting an A.
Yeah, I have them as at a B minus. I do think they actually did a good job addressing their needs, but I'm not really sure about the players that they drafted to fill those needs. Might have wanted to see a running back a little bit higher, get one of those like a tier up guys who can actually maybe contribute, maybe compete with Zamir White for that lead back role a little bit. Get somebody who's maybe a bit more pro ready at offensive tackle just in case it falters there again. And Brock Bowers, I mean, the two tight end sets is something we're excited by. It's not something that's a commonplace in the modern NFL. So I'm not sure about how this is going to pan out for them in the long run. So yeah.
So I don't want to spend too much time on just like, oh, they could have drafted this guy, they could have drafted this guy, but what do you think on the decision to pass on Rattler? Their previous pick before Rattler was off the board was Tommy Eichenberg. A little bit of questions about how much Eichenberg fits into the modern day NFL. Obviously, he's a solid run stuffer. So not to say Eichenberg can't contribute, but if what do you think of Rattler? And do you think that maybe that pick would have been more worth it? Better investment of assets.
I mean, I'm really not a fan of Rattler, so I would rather take something like Eichenberg, who is going to contribute, than just like wasting a pick on a QB, just like, oh, maybe he'll be good. I mean, if you don't like Rattler, you don't like Rattler. You don't just, kind of waste a pick just to appease a fan base or just saying, oh, well, we need a developmental guy. Let's go take a developmental guy. So, I mean, they have Aiden O'Connell, they have Gardner Minshew, they have an okay QB room. Let's leave it open for potential additions later. You can even get a UDFA guy that they maybe like more than Rattler and put on the practice squad. So I'm completely okay with that decision to pass on Rattler.
Yeah, I mean, for me, maybe they didn't like Rattler or Pratt, but I still think that it would have been worth the selection. I think you gotta see what you got, and if you thought Rattler wasn't necessarily a great guy to have in your locker room, that's fine. Go get a guy like Michael Pratt. But the fact that they just went out of here without a quarterback is a little concerning for me. I think I agree that there is appeal to just kind of being able to have it open for next season if the quarterback position isn't fully addressed. But it's worth a dart throw. This is a quarterback position. I mean, the position itself is most important in football. So if you can find it, if you can land it, especially when we're talking about like a fifth round pick rather than like a third or a second, where you can get like an immediate contributor, I think it would have been worth it.
They did get Carter Bradley as a UDFA. Just gonna say that.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I didn't hate Bradley. Thought he's better than Jordan Travis.
Oh boy.
Going
Jordan
on
Travis.
to the going on to the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, they incited nightmares for many draft fans and NFL fans alike by trading up in the first round, getting Xavier Worthy. Now, I will say, with Worthy, the speed's there, but I don't necessarily think he's this like Tyreek Hill deep threat type guy where you're sending him deep, running the vert, and there's just nothing the defense can do to stop him. He's a lot better in the short to intermediate game where you're asking him to run a hitch and then just be able to turn up field in a whim and just find a separation there. But it's still going to be a scary fit in this offense, having speed with Andy Reid, and assuming he can also develop that deep game with Patrick Mahomes throwing to him is going to be terrifying. What were your thoughts on the selection? What were your thoughts on the Bills being willing to trade down with their AFC competitors? And what are your thoughts overall?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the biggest storyline about this pick. Kind of Xavier Worthy's strengths and weaknesses. Who cares, right? The Bills, after I can think kind of famously a leak that they told Diggs you go anywhere but the Chiefs, and then they trade down the Chiefs, kind of knowing that they would take a wide receiver like Worthy, where a lot of Bills fans wanted Worthy in that spot. I don't know, could be disastrous just optics wise. But yeah, I kind of agree with you with Worthy. I don't think he's going to be used as a pure vertical threat in that offense. They did sign Marquise Brown, who's kind of a better fit for that role. But I mean, Worthy, it's always concerning when you have these 4-2 guys with Mahomes as the quarterback, going to be real stressful in the defense. And even if, they don't send him on these routes, it's something you got to account for. You got to play off him. You got to respect the speed on both sides. And I don't know many teams that could handle the vertical speed of both Xavier Worthy and Marquise Brown. So this has the potential to be a huge addition to this room.
Yeah, and they continue their success in day two. They only made one selection, so we're going to add in some of their day three picks as well. But they started off day two trading up again and getting Kingsley Suamataia, the offensive tackle out of BYU, a guy that many thought was a potential, fringe first round guy, fell to the back of the second, and the Chiefs take him to compete with Wanya Morris to be left tackle. They also add in Jared Wiley, tight end out of TCU, 6'7, 250 pounds, very nice receiving threat. And then they get Jaden Hicks, strong safety, who I think Dane Brugler had him as safety one in this class. So the fact that they're getting him in the fourth round, I mean, this is a very nice haul. And for me, I think what's most scary about this is I like Suamataia, but then you also have to consider that Jared Wiley, I mean, this is an offense that made Noah Gray effective, and they're pretty much just getting a 6'7, 250-pound Noah Gray now added into this offense. So that is terrifying for me. And then Jaden Hicks, I think, is going to be able to work his way into taking that strong safety spot to where when the money kind of gets tight, they can part ways with these veterans and still continue to keep the ship sailing.
Yeah, I think kind of the underrated aspect of maybe not underrated, but how dominant the Chiefs has been is how good they've been able to draft, especially in these mid rounds, find contributors, find guys you can start. You're not forced to take any, sign anybody. Anybody can walk to free agency. Kind of saw that with their cornerback room, they were okay letting L'Jarius Sneed walk. They didn't address the position in kind of the first 4 or 5 rounds. So yeah, I mean, this is just kind of a great draft for the Chiefs fans. You're looking at your board like who's still available, and you see the Chiefs are on the clock. You're like, oh, anybody but this guy, and then they just go ahead and take him. You're just like, ah, damn it. So yeah, this is kind of just a phenomenal stretch of picks for him. Yeah, Suamatia, a guy that was heavily mocked to them in the first round, again the second. Jared Wiley, a great receiving threat, kind of take that stress off. Travis Kelce, which is kind of seeing what they wanted to do last year, save him for the playoffs a little bit. So you add a receiving threat that can't step into Kelsey's shoes as nobody can, but maybe, alleviate some of the pressure, let him play some less snaps throughout the year. And Jaden Hicks, who has the potential to be a starter, a great player. So they might have done it again.
I think they absolutely did. And then day three was pretty interesting for them as well, with the fifth and on, because they got two interior offensive linemen. And I think the writing is on the wall that one of Trey Smith or Creed Humphrey is going to hit the open market very soon for the Chiefs. And they can't afford to keep both of them with such a top heavy roster where they're giving out these big contracts. I believe they just made Travis Kelce the most expensive tight end in the league after an extension today. So, I think both these picks, Norzad and CJ Henson, are situations where they're saying, look, hopefully one of these guys can step in and prove themselves so that we have an easier decision when it comes to trying to part ways with one of Creed Humphrey or Trey Smith. Right now, I lean that it would be Trey Smith just because I think guard is easier to replace, whereas center, there's a lot of chemistry. Creed Humphrey, I think, is a little younger or maybe same age, but I do think that he has the just like I think Creed Humphrey is just maybe a little bit more valued by the Chiefs right now. So I lean that Trey Smith to be the one that parts, but both guys are, they have nice size, nice athleticism. And I think that it's going to be a situation where the Chiefs are looking to see if one of them can step up and make the decision easier when it comes time to part ways with some of these valuable but very cheap contracts. And I think drafting in advance is a very smart strategy, especially for a team like the Chiefs who have been able to sustain talent so well. And then Kamal Hadden, this is one of my favorite sleeper cornerbacks in this class. With losing L'Jarius Sneed, you aren't necessarily desperate to go and get a new cornerback in this defense because you had Trent McDuffie that I think is going to kick outside. You have Joshua Williams, you have Jalen Watson, you have your starters. But if you can find more guys to continue to kind of roll them in and keep a rotation heavy going on to where no one's kind of getting exposed or burned or fatigued, then you have a very strong unit. And I really like Jamal Haddon as a 6th round pick. I think he's a phenomenal value and a great steal for the Chiefs. This is a terrifying draft class. They're the best team in the league to potentially have the best draft in the NFL. It's awful.
Yeah, this is not great for the rest of the league. I think I love what the Chiefs are doing. Really know the value of that rookie contract in terms of production. I completely agree with you with the idea they're trying to do, kind of see who can replace the on the interior offensive line. And you know what is it? And they're saying the message to these rookies are like, hey, the spot is yours. If you can earn it, these guys, they might not be on the team next year. We're not like guaranteed to sign them. If you cannot play them, if you give us confidence that you can be a starter, you will be a starter on this team. And with a team with as much prestige and success as them, that's everything a rookie wants to hear. So not only are they kind of replacing these guys, they're lighting a fire under their ass and saying the spotting spot is yours, go earn it. So yeah, a phenomenal draft by the Chiefs.
Yeah. So when it comes to grade, I mean, if I'm this terrified of it, I think I have to give it an A+. I think this is the prize jewel of this NFL draft. I think they had the best overall class when it comes to considering the value of picks that they had. Maybe Caleb Williams is going to be the more impactful player, but I think picking Caleb Williams at 1 is very impressive, but it's like the expected thing. Whereas being able to land Xavier Worthy at 28, being able to land Sua Mataia with the 63rd pick, and being able to get guys like Jaden Hicks at 133. I mean, this was phenomenal value, phenomenal way of playing the board. And for a team that's already like so dangerous, to have such a great class is just something that no one wanted to see, and they still did it anyway. So kind of rude of them. Maybe I'll knock them down just for like not being nice, but A+ for me, and it's something that I hate to say.
Yeah, I probably would have to give it an A+ as well. And I mean, like, we might look on this class in 3 years and been like, they didn't really get any impact pieces and wouldn't surprise me. But just the approach and kind of their intent with this draft that makes it an A+. Kind of had to give the grades at the time. These players could all bust, but their approach, their process to this draft was absolutely phenomenal. And there's a reason the team's a dynasty.
Yeah, and this is the AFC West review. We hope you guys like this. Stick around because we still have the NFC that will be coming up later this week. I'm Michael Rockman, that's Bailey Kumar, and that's the 2-minute drill.